Alexander Downer, you're our longest-serving Foreign Minister. How do you see the world?
Well, I agree that I think the strategic circumstances are difficult, if not dangerous. There are obviously hot wars in Ukraine, in the Middle East, and there's quite a serious risk in East Asia of war breaking out over Taiwan. So there are a couple of thoughts that I think people need to keep in their heads when thinking about this. The first is the linkages between countries that we might describe as adversaries, between China, North Korea, Iran and Russia. Strategically, these countries, they have very different interests, but strategically these countries are linked up. Secondly, we have to be robust in our support for liberal democracy and for our values against the threats from these people. And the only way to do that is to operate in a strong global alliance led by the United States for very obvious reasons, but to make sure we, as Australia, make a serious contribution to that alliance. And if this alliance holds, if it's properly cemented, if it's well led by the Americans, and if we as members of the alliance are serious about making a practical contribution to defence through our spending and our equipment, then we will maintain a balance of power in the world, and that will be a force for peace. But if we fail on any of those things, then the risks are huge.
Mike Pizzullo, you were the lead author in that 2009 Defence White Paper. You've been the head of Home Affairs. When Beijing sent warships to lap Australia and have a live fire exercise off our coast at the beginning of this year, what message was Beijing sending us?
Well, first and foremost, it was an attempt to project power in the sense that we would recognise it as their ability to do that, to coerce us potentially. But I suspect as they were doing their operation, they were probably also in the hull of the ship, inside the ship, rehearsing missile strikes, because you wouldn't go all the way down here and not actually practice the very thing that particularly the principal ship was designed to do, which is to fire a very large number of land attack missiles. On the question of threat, Australia is an incredibly secure country. We would not be having this conversation but for one factor. If we were dealing with the China that Bob Hawke, Paul Keating and John Howard were dealing with, technocratic China, focused on prosperity, on lifting the living standards and eradicating poverty, I'd find it very hard. As someone who actually was the lead defence planner when Joel Fitzgibbon was the minister, I could not justify us spending the amount of money that we're spending now on defence. In other words, we're spending enough to hedge a future threat, but the fact that we've got a different China than the China that Hawke, Keating and Howard dealt with, that's the swing factor.
Dr. Alexandra Mallaloy, you are an expert in drone warfare, but you're a Ukrainian Australian. You've been on the front line in Ukraine. Is there any doubt in your mind that China is working with Russia in that war?
Look, I think that one of these strategic challenges that we experience is really that combination of China working with Russia, apart from North Korea and Iran working with Russia. And this emergent axis is quite concerning. There was an evidence that China was supporting their dual-use technology and supporting Russia in their war against Ukraine. And more so, Chinese citizens were reportedly in the front line alongside Russia. Apart from them, Chinese military officers have been learning alongside Russia the tactical lessons, and they continue doing so. And I think that's although China take that neutrality concerns, it's really concerning for Australia as well.
And just one other thing, you're completely right. And China is buying Russian oil. So in effect, China is financing Russia's war in Ukraine. Don't forget that.
In addition to other countries.
In addition to other countries.
And Catherine Manstead, you look not just the real world, but the virtual world. Could we say, in some ways, that we're already at war?
We're certainly not at peace. And when we're talking about complex geostrategic circumstances, there's a temptation to think we're talking about things out there, not already on the home front. But we know in Australia that actively Chinese military cyber spies are actively probing our civilian critical infrastructure, looking for weaknesses and looking for ways to get in and hide and bide, potentially for high impact sabotage if relations deteriorate in the region.
Ross Babbage, you have briefed people in this room, or in this building, I should say, so you've got a long history of working with government and being a strategic analyst. How is the world as you see it?
Look, I think it's got a lot worse, the overall strategic environment. There's no question about that. But I think the major change for us is just the rapid growth and the breadth of the growth of the defence and related capabilities that the Chinese have invested in and are investing in. And it's not just military. They've been changing the structure of their economy to be able to conduct a major military operation and sustain it indefinitely pretty well. So we've seen big changes in infrastructure, which they've actually announced publicly are being driven, and intentionally being driven, by strategic imperatives for a potential conflict on an equal basis for economic development. And that's changing a lot. And they're also preparing their community to psychologically for tough times that may come. So we're looking at the possibility of a serious crisis.
Mick Ryan, you're a former general. How do you see it as a military conflict? What do you see when you look around the world at the build-up that we're looking at the moment?
Well, what I see at the moment is something that I think most Australians don't perceive, which is a global adaptation war, where Iran, North Korea, China and Russia are collaborating to learn from each other. They've established a knowledge market in battlefield tactics, in technologies, in strategic coercion, in misinformation, in defence production, in a way that we just haven't seen before. And that allows them to learn from each other, whether it's in Ukraine, the Middle East, or even in their Western Pacific operations, and do so at a speed that is incomprehensible to most bureaucrats in this country. And unfortunately, I think the greatest threat that we face is complacency. Too many people in this country either believe there is not a threat, or they act as if there is not a threat.